Hello and welcome to Fire Emblem Agree to Disagree. In this series, I take some opinions from around the FE community and pose them to my guest, where we discuss whether we agree with them and our reasons why. Before we start, I would like to thank the people who back the channel on Patreon. It helps me out a lot and I really appreciate the support. If you are interested in backing the channel, where for $1 a month you can get access to a bunch of benefits, check the link in the description. I will be taking 4 opinions from either my own community or Reddit, and 1 opinion of my own concoction, and my guest and I will debate on whether we strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree with the opinion, as well as going into our reasons why. This series is mainly focused around the discussion with not too much going on visually, so if you want to tab out and listen to this in the background or use it as a pseudo podcast, go for it. If you have an opinion that you would like to see discussed on this series, feel free to drop it in the comments below. Whilst you're down there, if you wouldn't mind rating the video, it would be greatly appreciated. If you are a content creator who is interested in appearing on this series, feel free to get in touch, either through Discord or Twitter, links to both are in the description. Today I am joined by MythrilZenith.
Hello everybody, this is MythrilZenith. How's it going? I do some Fire Emblem stuff on my YouTube channel. Mostly tier lists, some different discussions, I talk about gameplay stuff, and I'm ready to talk about some hot takes, shall we call it?
I think that's a good way to call it. So the one thing that probably is important to note is I had to collate this list of takes, so I've seen them all before, but you haven't. These are completely new to you, so it's a bit unfair. I've had a bit of a chance to form an opinion, whereas you haven't, but this first one, I think, is one that you will already have somewhat of an opinion on. So, the first take we've got today comes from somebody in my community, Mudak, and the take is, the tier list mentality is outdated and irrelevant, as using bad units or stupid/funny builds is more than possible and generally more fun to do or watch.
Okay, so the take is specifically that the tier list mentality is outdated and irrelevant.
Yes.
I feel like I have to disagree on premise of my channel, but...
I was going to say, we do both have some stakes in this opinion. We have both engaged in quite a bit of tier list content. I can't say the word engaged anymore, it just feels cursed because of the game.
Yeah, no, same thing. You can't say engaged now without thinking of Fire Emblem 17 or 18, whatever number it is. But yeah, I would only kind of moderately disagree. I feel like... So, something that I do is I've started really thinking about tier lists in a more broader perspective. I've done videos on breaking down, hey, if you're doing a different type of run, the tier list is going to look very different. Like I compared, okay, a tier list versus with someone who's doing like an LTC or a speed run of like, let's just say FE8 because I'm familiar with that. It's like, yeah, sure, it's Seth. It's your non-Seth carry, it's a couple of utility units, and everyone else is F tier because you don't care about them at all. Versus, for like an, quote, efficiency playthrough, which is, okay, these units kind of tend to make the game easier, then it's like, yeah, Seth, and you have like Franz and Vanessa and whatever. Versus people who are like, oh, if you only care about endgame potential, then that's a different list as well, and here's that other list. And so I think that while I would somewhat agree that the classic efficiency tier list mentality is a bit outdated. I don't think it's outdated or irrelevant. I think that if you think it's outdated or irrelevant, if you think, you know, using funny builds is more than possible and generally more fun to watch, you're kind of beyond the point of needing a tier list at that point. So I kind of disagree on the idea that tier lists are completely outdated and irrelevant in general. I think that as you play more and learn more, you have the opportunity to experiment more and play more around with different units and to deliberately, you know, handicap yourself, sandbag, snowball, whatever. And that's fun, and that's fine, and that's, you know, frankly really entertaining and enjoyable to watch. But I think I disagree with the idea that tier list mentality then is outdated and irrelevant because, to a certain extent, part of the fun comes from bucking the traditions set by tier list mentality and efficiency mentality. And so you kind of have to have something, you have to have like a stable core in order to really say, I'm breaking off from the core and doing something different.
Yeah, I think like part of this is that using bad units is more enjoyable, which inherently implies a relevance to to a tier list, because the bad units are the ones just at the bottom end of the tier list. I will say, I do think it's quite odd how a large portion of the community seem to not really care about efficiency in a playthrough, but that's what most tier lists are catered towards. I don't know if it's just the type of people who are more likely to create a tier list are the ones who are more focused around that efficiency style of play, or whether it's just because that efficiency has become the default standard by what tier lists are judged by. I would personally like to see a lot more sort of variations of styles of tier lists. I'd like to see tier lists for things like Iron Man's, or, you know, some sort of, not like a really out there challenge run, otherwise that would be fairly useless, but something like, you know, this is if you're playing the game without using these mechanics or doing these things, like something that's relatively standard. Like, I think it's usually factored in anyway, but Sacred Stones without the Tower of Volney, for example, or something like that, like with no grinding. It's particularly relevant for something like Three Houses. But yeah, I do think, personally, it's hard. There's definitely aspects of it I agree with. I think I'm going to lean towards disagree myself too, but there definitely is some merit, I think, to what's being said here.
Definitely. And to carry on that a little bit, if that's okay, I think that the... I lost it. What were you saying? Something about the tier list being... wanting to see other types of tier lists, or wondering why... You know, most people don't seem to care about efficiency. Why are we making all our tier lists about efficiency?
Yeah.
I feel like it's because of the old guard of Fire Emblem content creators really cared more about efficiency. And as we're seeing kind of a new generation of people rise up, a new generation of different takes and different ideas, I feel like within the next kind of year or two, the next... Not necessarily... It's weird to say movement in the Fire Emblem community, but I feel like these types of more niche lists, like this is not the first time I've heard about people wanting, hey, a more Iron Man specific tier list, a more LTC specific tier list, you know, stuff like that. And I feel like this is going to be a lot bigger as time goes on, as people, because I think people are just getting sick of it, because I think that it's just, we've been doing these same types of tier lists for the last like 5-10 years.
Yeah, it has almost just become like the default. Like, we do obviously need a way to separate units by how good they are, because I think especially in a lot of modern Fire Emblems, anyone can be good, and you can get use out of anyone, especially as grinding mechanics and things like that, or bonus EXP in the Tellius games have become things like you can inject EXP into anyone, make them very good, and then they'll perform. So we need like, oh, this unit takes less effort, they take less turns, or something like that to measure against. I just think there's more ways to do it than just turn count. Like, Iron Man's is the really obvious one. It's quite a... I don't want to say a common form of play, but it's not entirely rare either. So I would like to see that sort of expand a bit more, and maybe it's something I should look into doing myself, because I've always used efficiency as kind of my own basis too, so maybe I'm guilty of the things I see as maybe an issue with this type of content.
Definitely. And I think that as we go forward, I've definitely noticed within myself and within the community, it seems like a lot less focus is being placed on efficiency as like an abstract concept, and more focus is being placed on, okay, how much investment, how much do they take to get going? Like, for instance, Jean. Okay, yeah, Jean can be the best in any one particular class, but how long does it take him to get there? What resources does he take to get there, type thing?
I think that's definitely fair.
Okay.
Okay.
Not too hot of a take.
No, we're actually agreed. We'll that's quite... We're agreed. That's a good start. So
I don't find myself too disagreeable, but we'll see how disagreeable some of these takes are.
We'll see. Well, this next one comes from Reddit, and it is: unlimited range warp is bad for the game. Skipping whole maps just removes the fun in the game altogether. Now, I think the focus on this one should probably be on the second part of that statement, the part about skipping maps, rather than just unlimited range warp, because I think that's sort of a smaller sub-factor of the whole skipping maps issue.
Do you want to do this one first, or should I
happy to lead
give
off
my
on this
unfiltered one? Sorry, what?
I'm happy to lead off on this one.
Okay.
So, I think there is a major issue when it comes to skipping maps in Fire Emblem. I think it's quite glaring that, especially with something like Three Houses, I have to expressly do a playthrough where I have to, like, set myself, not a challenge, but almost like a rule in place to say, I'm not just going to skip maps, because Three Houses is the really obvious example, because you can get warped so early in that game with Lysithea that you could pretty much just skip every map that remotely poses a challenge, and then there isn't really too much left in the game to actually compete with. There's the occasional route map, which is more an issue with the objective design in that game, and to an extent the map design as well, but not entirely, I don't think. But I agree that skipping whole maps can remove the fun in the game. It can be fun for an individual playthrough, but I think in terms of replayability, you almost have to like just gate yourself from doing it. And it's not expressly due to warp. There's a lot of other movement mechanics that also play into this fact. There's also the whole juggernauting issue, which I think Engage has tried to answer a little bit. It's obviously got revival crystals, so you can't really just solo a boss, although then you can warp 5 people at once, so that stops being relevant. But yeah, I think in general map skipping can be quite harmful to a game, especially when you know how to do it, because you're kind of creating your own challenges at that point, not really the ones that the game poses to you.
Yeah, this is a hard one for me because I personally pretty much have never fully warp skipped any chapters in my Fire Emblem career. Like, I played through, Thracia only once, but like I didn't warp skip the Reinhardt chapter. I did other things. I abused Ensorcel to silence Reinhardt, but I didn't warp skip it, Yeah. And so it's like, and so warp skipping for me is not enjoyable and not fun. But at the same time, I know a lot of people who really love it and find a lot of interesting depth and kind of optimizing maps. So it's like, I'm mixed on it. It's like, I think that warp skipping has a place, and I think that the question was specifically about infinite range warp?
Yes, it was unlimited range warps.
Okay. I think unlimited range warps can work, but they put a lot more strain on the map design itself.
Yeah.
So for instance, Gaiden, Fire Emblem Gaiden, Fire Emblem 2, Echoes is a remake of it, but I think Echoes has limits on warp range. Gaiden doesn't.
Yes.
Gaiden, you can just warp Alm all the way, like, right next to Desai or whatever, and, you can warp Alm right to Duma if you want. You're stupid if you do, you're gonna die, and that's because of Gaiden's map design being route instead of kill boss. I think the bigger issue is not necessarily that warp ruins maps, or even the infinite range warp moves maps, ruins maps. It's more of infinite use warp ruins kill boss maps.
I can definitely agree with that, and I think there's instances where it's been used quite well. I'd point to FE7 as a potential example where you get warp very late in the game, and you've also got objectives rather than kill boss, it's seize, which is very similar, but requires that extra unit to be there if your lord isn't the one who can kill the boss, and even if they are, they need that survival turn to be able to then seize next time. But yeah, getting warp so late in FE7 is, I think, something that really helps, because you don't get it until after COG, or you get it on COG, but you probably aren't making much use of it on that chapter, meaning you can't warp skip half the maps in the game, whereas if we compare that to something like Three Houses, getting warp on chapter 5 is a little bit ludicrous, and I think one of the maps that, for me, really shines from sort of the issues of this is Land of the Golden Deer, the Lawrence Paralogue, which, if you do this without warp skipping, is genuinely a really challenging and, in my opinion, really enjoyable map, whereas if you skip the map, it's over in a single turn, and you immediately get an incredibly powerful reward for that Thyasus. So I think it can really hinder, like, locking challenges, or locking rewards behind difficult challenges, because if you want that reward early, that should be quite a difficult map to take on, but because of the existence of, and it's not just warp, there's a lot of movement mechanics in Three Houses that cause all these issues. There's stride, there's just the prevalence of flying glasses. There's a lot, and also the one-shot potential in that game is fairly off the charts with so many brave abilities and all of this stuff.
Three Houses is a nonsense fest when it comes to gameplay. They give you 500 tools, they only require you to use like 5 of them.
Yes.
But people have used 500 tools to break that game completely open in ways that I'm just like, Three Houses is a great game for people who really want to think real hard about how they want to make their units. I don't want to think hard about how I make my units. I just want to play the maps.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think I'm a weird one to rank, agree or disagree on if warp ruins the game, because I don't think warp ruins the game, but I also am not warp skipping. I'm not a warp skipper. Like, I just don't even use it, so...
I guess my follow-up question to that would be, do you think, that you could use warp to get to the boss and just kill them and end the map in not just Three Houses, a lot of games in the series where they have kill boss maps, that becomes an option. But you have to choose not to because you want to fully experience the map. Do you think that's a bad thing within the game?
giving people the option to skip.
Yes.
So I think it's bad to give people the option to skip.
I guess it's more a case of, do you think it's bad that you have to inherently make the map harder for yourself, knowing you could just end it immediately, but you choose not to?
I don't necessarily see it as making the map harder for myself. Like, in certain circumstances, like the closest I've come to warps, quote warp skipping, is recently with Engage. I don't know if you've played the Marth Paralog yet.
I have.
But they completely ruined that map's design.
Yes.
With it, it's probably one of the worst paralogs in the game, unfortunately.
That's fair.
Because they took this amazing map from FE1, FE3, FE11, FE12, with strong intentionality, and they just made it so, okay, well, the thieves have passed anyway, so there's no point in warping someone over to block the thieves. The treasure's not even that good anyway, so, you're just sending yourself up against 500 heroes, and meanwhile, I don't know, I literally just fought Marth in that map because I just couldn't be bothered to take the treasure, and so when I think of maps in that sense, because I didn't necessarily use warp, but I mean, that's kind of what people do when they warp skip, is they just, don't care about the rest of the map and kill the boss. I think that fundamentally comes down to poor map design. Is like, a good map is one that you want to play through, regardless of it being difficult. And I think that if people find a map difficult and want to skip it, maybe not skip the whole thing, but it's like, I think that if warp is a sufficiently limited tool that say, hey, you can skip, 3 maps if you want to use it for skipping maps, let's say, then I think that's fair, because that then gives people the choice, do I want to skip this map, or do I want to maybe skip a later map type thing, or use it for another tactical advantage? And so I don't think the warp is the problem, I think that the map design is the problem.
That's fair. So where do you come down on this in terms of your placement?
Can you post the exact take again in the Discord chat? I think
Oh, sorry. It's unlimited range warp is bad for the game. Skipping whole maps just removes the fun in the game altogether.
That's the thing. It's like, me personally, I kind of agree that skipping maps removes the fun altogether, but I disagree with the idea that unlimited range warp is inherently bad for the game, and so I think I'm going to disagree on this.
Okay.
Just because it's not that unlimited range warp is bad for the game, it's that unlimited range warp makes any flaws in map design, like, busts them wide open.
Yeah.
Any bad map busts it wide open and just makes it a giant eyesore.
So I think for me, I think I'm going to lean towards agree on this one, because I always find it inherently odd when I recognize I have a way to beat a level, right? The game has challenged me to clear a map. I have a way to clear a map, but I have to choose not to take it to get more fun out of the level, or to, better engage with the game, or just to provide myself with a challenge, because I probably am thinking very much about Three Houses and Engage when I say this, but there are so many opportunities where you can just very immediately clear maps very easily, and I always just find it strange when I have to essentially stop myself from beating the chapter, because otherwise it just feels cheap. I feel like that should almost be the game's job to provide me with that challenge and say, come up with the solution, rather than mine, in a sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for instance, a map that is kind of more interesting to skip than to play legitimately, like, when a map manages to create that situation, then it's like, okay, cool. Warp is fun. Warp is cool.
Yeah.
Or even like other tools. FE9, the priest pushing map.
Yes.
It's like, in that case, I don't necessarily think it's bad map design, but I think that that's definitely a map that rewards you for thinking on your toes and being like, hey, how can I take out the boss, snipe the boss through warp or bolting or whatever. I actually don't think you have warp in that game, but...
You don't, but there's something about that map as well that makes it really interesting, is if you skip it, you miss out on rewards, and some of those rewards are quite valuable. Whereas I think that's where some of the more modern games have failed. Rewards on map have kind of decreased in terms of their overall value because of a lot more resources. But they have still had instances where skipping maps is a lot of fun. I would point to the final chapter of Crimson Flower as being one of those maps where, like, if you actually get that Raging Storm combo off and you manage to smack down the Immaculate one in, like, 4 hits, it feels really satisfying, even if it isn't skip. It feels like an accomplishment. And so that's why I'm only leaning on agree and not the strongly agree. I don't think it's all bad all the time, or you can't have any fun with skipping, but I personally prefer when it isn't an option.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think unlimited range warps only only trivializes maps and makes them no fun when there is nothing to do but complete the map. I
Yes.
think that if there is more stuff on the map to do, then why are you warp skipping all the cool stuff to do?
Mm-hmm. That is,
even if it's available.
That is definitely fair. So, a slight difference on that one, but
just a little bit.
Just a little bit. So, the next opinion comes from JRA in my Discord. To have good replayability, a game should ideally make as many characters viable as possible and also make them flexible for fun.
What do you mean by flexible?
It's a big question, isn't it? Because we can have the Three Houses branch of flexibility where you can make Caspar a Dark Mage, or, you know, put Lysithia in Great Knight, or we have sort of like the more middle ground, the Sacred Stones, where you could go Warrior on Ross, or you could go Berserker, or you simply have, I might use this unit a little bit differently from the games where you don't necessarily have that class flexibility, but you could use them in a different way.
Sure. Sorry, I'm chewing on ice right now. I shouldn't be doing this.
It's okay.
So, I mean, I could post my own hot take in a response to this.
Okay.
I don't know if it's necessarily a hot take, but I just kind of... My personal take on Fire Emblem is I don't like reclassing. Not that I don't like that it exists, but I just never interact with it. I rarely interact with it when it's there, outside of just like changing one or two units here and there. And so games that really revolve around reclassing and reclassing choices in order to kind of encourage you to replay them ends up backfiring and makes me want to replay them less. Like, for instance, Three Houses. I burned out. I played all 4 routes. I pretty much mostly just used their characters in their kind of default, like, basically, like, canon route class, if you will, type things. Like, when you face them as enemies, that's the class they are.
Yep.
And I have no desire to go back and try different builds because that just doesn't excite me. Meanwhile, I feel like to have replayability, though, with the first part, making as many characters viable as possible, I feel like that is the game's responsibility to make characters viable, but I feel like part of replayability does come from deliberately having the option to choose to take a terrible character like Wendy or Sophia, for instance, and try to make them good, you know, no matter how horrible it ends up being. I feel like that makes the game more replayable. And so I think I'm going to have to disagree on this one, is that I think a game should make characters viable. I think a game having flexible characters is probably better for most people to find replayable. But for me, I just want a game that I can sit down and just get right into and play without having to spend hours thinking about and planning about my run. I don't want to spend hours in base, I just want to sit down and play. And I think a more replayable game is a game that allows me to get to the actual map of Fire Emblem faster. And that's what I kind of rank on replayability, not even just a replayability, but that's something that I like and something that I find I gravitate towards more than flexibility in characters, or more than everyone has to be viable.
That's fair.
Because viability is a weird concept anyway.
Yeah, I think viability is a strange concept because we're sort of going back to the tier list thing here, but you can make any character good. So I can't think of many characters in Fire Emblem that just are strictly not viable. But in terms of flexibility, I don't think it's a requirement. I think it can help. I think it can definitely help replayability. I say recently, it was a few months ago now, but did the interesting builds run of Three Houses where we used a bunch of kind of not like meme builds, but things like Great Knight Hilda, Falconite Marianne, Mage Leone, and
just like the one or two builds off of what people normally do.
Yeah,
but
like
where there's still some sort of niche ability that you're focusing on.
Yeah, like you have like your optimal builds and your, you know, this is really, really good, and then we just went a couple of levels below that and like, this is still good, but it's a little bit different. And
yeah,
it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that option for flexibility, and it did create a very interesting playthrough that would have only been good on a replay, I think. So I do think it can aid it. I don't think it's a requirement, and that's my sticking point here. Because I think you can have a game with not much flexibility. I'd look at something like... I know you've got your route differences, but I'm just assuming Hector Hard Mode when I say FE7. You don't
Sure.
have a ton of flexibility in that game. Obviously, you can do various paralogs, and there's a lot of units to use. And the viability mark is absolutely checked there, but you don't have much flexibility in what those units can actually do. They essentially fulfill the same role every time you use them, assuming you give them a similar level of resources, but I don't think that really accounts for flexibility. I gave this character less EXP or didn't promote them or something like that. But I think that game's got great replay value. I think there's a lot of merit to FE7 from a replay. I mean, I'm possibly spoiling something here, but we recently wrapped up the FE7 co-op playthrough that I'm doing with Tegan, and if you ask me now to do another playthrough of FE7, I could quite happily do that. It's just something about... I think the game flows very smoothly. I think there's not much, like, sort of slowdown on the game, which is something I'd sort of level at FE9 as an example. It can be quite a slow game at points, where replaying it feels a lot like... There's a lot of time waiting, there's a lot of time sort of where you're in a bit of a slog, just waiting for things to progress, particularly with some of those enemy phases. As another game that I replayed recently, it's just kind of fresh in my mind that, like, I'm probably not replaying that one for a while, but it's more to do with the speed at which the game goes, I think, is more important to me for replayability.
That's true, that's fair. The speed and the length. I think that FE7, all things considered, FE7 is actually a pretty short game. FE9, Radiant Dawn especially, it's like, I love Radiant Dawn, I adore it. I have a really hard time getting the gumption to sit down and actually play a full run of Fire Emblem 10, of Radiant Dawn, because I know that's going to be a 40 to 80 hour game.
Yeah, it's a lot about that downtime, but then again, you also have a lot of that downtime in Three Houses, which I think is another game which has a lot of replay value, so I'd more say there's a myriad of factors that go into it, so I think I'm going to strongly disagree with this one. I don't think it needs to have characters be flexible for it to have good replayability. It can help, but I don't think it's a necessity at all.
Yeah, I definitely am on the disagree side. I don't know if I'd necessarily say strongly disagree, but then again, trying to get me to strongly have an opinion on anything feels like a hard take, unless it's about Fates, but we'll get to that later, maybe.
Yeah, so the first strongly disagree in the series, this is the first one, so it's nice to have one out of the way. At least I've set the tone that it's okay to strongly disagree or agree with something. Yeah. I'm assuming you're fairly familiar with Engage from sort of its release. The next take is very Engage focused. It's relating specifically to a certain skill. Canter in Engage is overrated.
Ooh, overrated. Oh, I'm gonna have to strongly disagree with that. Canter is amazing, and I love it, and I love everything it stands for, and I love being able to put it on every unit. It is so good.
So, this is an awkward one, because I think Canter is very, very good. Let's just get that out of the way. It allowed you to move after combat, so that's a good thing. Particularly when it upgrades to Canter Plus and you get that extra tile, it's really, really nice. And especially with how early you can get Canter on those early batch of units, it's valuable. It absolutely is. I do think it's very overrated, though. I think so much of that early game focus has gone into who can get Canter, when there's a lot of other viable abilities that are available at that time. And I think there's a lot of people who sort of view it as you get some units to 1000 SP and they inherit Canter. And I think there's other options there. There's one in particular, which is Momentum. It's the Sigurd ability where you gain damage based on the amount of tiles you moved on your initial attack, which I think is incredibly underrated at the minute. I think it's definitely a consideration, especially with the prevalence of crits in that game, because if you can move 4 tiles and get a crit, that's 12 extra damage, which is quite a relevant amount, and that's only when you're into your sort of earliest classes. You can easily get that to 5 or 6 tiles of movement, but getting a little bit off topic there, I'm going to slightly agree with this. I think Canter is great. I think it's very, very good. I do think it's being slightly overrated. And the other big thing I have with Canter, I don't think it's making that early batch of units who can get Canter very early. Obviously, everyone can get it, but there's a group of units who can get it before a certain chapter. I'm trying not to spoil too much with Engage, with it still being new.
Yeah, no.
And then there's a pause before your other units can get it. And I don't think it's making that early batch of units better than the units that join in that gap. I mean, obviously that's an incredibly strong batch of units, but if it was as powerful as it's being made out to be, I would expect it to be some sort of leveler, right? Between those incredibly powerful statted units and the units who are a bit worse statted but now have access to this very strong ability. And it doesn't feel like that. It's definitely closes the gap a bit, but it doesn't level it. And again, with how powerful I think it's sometimes made out to be, I would expect it to bridge that gap almost completely, or perhaps give the Canter the edge, especially with how much focus is being put into, oh, you want to do this with your emblem so you can get Canter early on. I think it is being slightly overvalued in that sense. That being said, still very, very good. I'm going to lean on agree with this one, though.
That's fair, that's fair. I think that I go back to strongly disagree, mostly because, again, it's that whole idea of being overrated. I think that if you're saying that just put Canter on a unit and they can instantly be, like, godlike, I think that's not true.
Yeah, I don't think that's anyone's opinion, yeah.
But I fight against this because this is kind of the same battle that I fought with chain attacks with Brave Assist that are being fought a little bit with, like, people saying, especially the Dual Assist Plus, people, you know, fight this, and I kind of fought back a little bit against Dual Assist Plus as well. But it's the idea that, oh, this skill needs to go on everyone. This skill, like, fundamentally redefines unit. I don't think you need to put Canter on everyone, and I don't think it, like, I think that Canter is a skill that can benefit anyone, but I don't think it needs to be on everyone. I think there are still other equally viable options. It just depends on what you value. And for me, personally, when I'm playing Fire Emblem, I highly value movement. Movement is the best stat, which is kind of funny because I hate cavalry. I hate using cavalry in Engage because I think they're just, like, nowhere near... I think that the infantry class abilities, backup and occasionally covert, are just so good that it's... And even armor. Yeah. They managed to make me care about armor knights and generals and want to pick a general over a great knight. How did Engage do this? I'm confused. But the options that Canter allows are such that there is not any other skill that really gives those options. And I'm thinking of stuff like hit and run tactics, you know, fly out, fly up a bridge, hit Hortensia or hit the unit on the, you know, chapter 10, hit the, you know, use Sigurd, fly up, hit the unit on the fire orb, and then fly back out of range. You can only do that with Canter.
Yes.
A lot of dance setups, especially Byleth Goddess dance setups. Hit, move, adjust, boom, Goddess dance. Heck, Goddess dance and then Canter out. And then a lot of, like, Seedall dance setups. You know, you move him, you dance, you Canter out, you Goddess dance him, you dance, you know, all this type of stuff you do. And so I think that because of what Canter allows and what Canter allows you to set up as just the ultimate movement utility, is that it has to be, in my mind, up there with the best skills in the game. I don't think it necessarily makes units, like, turn... The thing about Canter is that it doesn't affect combat specifically at all. And I think that is the big line that people are finding, because there's a lot of units in Engage that just need a little bit more help in that combat ratio. There's a lot of units that are, you know, especially on Maddening, 2 or 3 damage shy of just getting that one shot, or 1 or 2 points of speed shy of doubling. And you find a lot of these edge cases where just a little bit more smart investment of your resources in a different direction makes all the difference. And I think because of that, people saying Canter is overrated have a reasonable argument, have a good point. I still have to strongly disagree, though, that Canter is completely underrated, because I feel like what it does is so unique and so different. And I'm not even necessarily talking about that mid game, you know, the soul mark or whatever. Like, specifically, even just, like, on my last Maddening run, the first Maddening run I'm not doing it on stream, I didn't get Canter on any of my units in that early section, in the early game. And so during the mid game, when I couldn't inherit Canter, I didn't have it at all. But then as soon as I had the opportunity to get Canter again, I put Canter on half my army. But I still have some units that don't have Canter because I gave them stuff like Dual Assist. I gave them stuff like Alacrity, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't feel bad about that, about those decisions. But I do definitely feel so much more powerful with Canter than I did without it. And so I think I have to strongly disagree that it's totally overrated.
That's definitely fair. And I think, like, once again, Canter is absolutely a great ability. And part of this take in general revolves around community opinion, and it's possible
Mm-hmm.
we might just have different views of the community opinion on Canter or something like that. So we might actually have similar views on the ability itself, but different views on the perception of it that leads to whether or not we think it's overrated. But
Yeah, exactly. And where you're looking in the community definitely changes things. I noticed that as I've stopped looking at places like Reddit and whatnot, I kind of tend to become my own island of opinions, and then I just
Yeah.
kind of hear these other opinions float to me, and I'm like, people are really thinking that, are they?
yeah, I can definitely relate to that to a degree. So I'm going to agree with this, but it's not because I think Canter is bad or anything like that. I just think there's this overvaluation on it compared to other abilities specifically, and especially in those early chapters.
Yeah.
It's a very, very good ability. I just don't think it's got the same level as sort of the same pinnacle that people seem to be giving it.
Fair enough.
So, one final take to go over, and this one comes from me, but it's not necessarily an opinion I hold. It's one I came up with that I wanted to pose to you. So,
Ooh.
Fire Emblem Engage's Somniel is a better hub than Fire Emblem Three Houses Monastery.
Okay. Ooh, this is hard because I mean, Fire Emblem Engage's Somniel is infinitely more skippable than the Three Houses Monastery.
That's definitely true.
So it really comes down to how you feel about hubs in general. What do you think they add? What do you think they take away from?
So
Sorry, you were saying.
yeah, so I think the Somniel is more skippable. I do agree with that. I also think there are other advantages of it, and I'm just going to clear this up now. We'll talk about the Somniel as it is currently. Obviously, there's been some changes from release. They've added the well, they've added the support locations where you can bond with your allies, and they've also moved the inherit skills to the arena. We'll talk about it within that context, not as it was like on launch or something, just to try and keep the video up to date as possible, although I'm sure it'll be out of date in like 2 weeks' time.
That's fine. I have yet to actually boot up Engage since they've made that change. I've been on vacation for the last week, and so I just haven't had my Switch around, or I had my Switch, but I didn't have 2 seconds to play it. So it's one of those things where it's like I know of the changes, and I know that it fixes one or two of the issues. I think that there are still a lot of usability issues with the Somniel, but as it is right now, I hesitate to say it's a better hub, because ultimately it comes down to I dislike the need for like explorable hubs in general. I feel it is tedious and wastes my time, and I don't care about having 500 different mini games to do between playing Fire Emblem. I'd rather play just a different game and then play Fire Emblem again. I think I'm actually gonna have to disagree with this, that it's a better hub than the Monastery, in a weird way though, because it's like it's more skippable. I think I like playing Engage. I like Engage's loop better than the Three Houses loop. Oh, do I disagree though? Because I think the Monastery has merit, but gets so overused, especially when you're going into the second half of the game. I feel like the game would actually have been stronger had they stripped the Monastery in the second half and just had like a small camp, kind of like if they had even just like the camp something closer to like what you had in Three Hopes.
Yes, I can see that.
Three Hopes, or that one chapter in Crimson Flower before going to war. Free time skip. So I don't know. Because I dislike both of them for different reasons. Because I dislike the Three Houses Monastery because of how much time it takes, because of how necessary everything is, and because it encourages so much just, for lack of a better term, time-wasting stuff.
Yeah.
All the social management aspects of it in order to, feed your class, in order to maximize their efficiency, in order to learn more, in order to feed your class more, to learn more. And the fact that in every playthrough without New Game Plus, you have to spend like 5 hours of that playthrough fishing just to level up your professor rank. I think that because of that, the Three Houses Monastery is like, it does a lot of cool things. It does a lot of good things for the story and for the world. I hate it. But with the Somniel, it's like, I hate it for very different reasons, because it's just fundamentally, like, I don't want to swear or anything. It's like a fundamentally half-baked hub.
Yes.
Is that it has a lot of, here's a fun idea, but we don't want to make it mandatory, we don't want to make it important, so we're just going to make it give bond fragments. But then also it comes back to Engage's bigger problem, which is a lot of really obvious stuff, or stuff that should be obvious, just isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would love to be able to sort my bond rings by rank, please.
Yeah.
No, you can't do that. You have to sort them. You have to look at them through the list based on how we've sorted them.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to see my weapon weight. You can't do that. Only when you're in the Somniel, and then you can press a button. But when you're on the field, you can't do that. The fact that they fixed they allow you to inherit skills inside the arena, so you can level up whatnot there with bond ranks, is good. Why wasn't that in base? I don't know. But I feel like the Somniel is just kind of broken. Not broken in the sense of like it's overpowered, or broken in the sense of like it's buggy and doesn't work, but it doesn't feel good to use. I'm never happy to come back to the Somniel and explore it and do all this stuff. I'm only happy about it because I can do the loop and get it over with quickly.
That's definitely fair. I think there are some merits to both. I'll throw it out there right now. I agree with this take. I prefer the Somniel to the Monastery from a gameplay perspective. And one of the big things for that for me, and I've said this on stream a couple of times, so apologies if some viewers have heard this before. If you're playing Three Houses with some degree of, like, what I would consider playing optimally, I'm doing the Monastery 2 or 3 times between each battle. And those Monastery sessions can take 20 minutes plus. It depends what you're doing in terms of tournaments, in terms of cooking, whether you cook to boost motivation or you run around and give people gifts, things like that, whether you go to Abyss, which is like a 15-minute loading screen. Whether or not you do those things, you can change the time, but you're doing it a lot more frequently, whereas the Somniel is once between battle. Now, you do have to do it between paralogs, which you don't in Three Houses, but I think it's a much better loop. You do a battle, you do the Somniel, you do a battle, you do the Somniel. It flows a little bit better than, like, okay, I'm going to do 3 monasteries in a row, and now it's 2 battles in a row, and then it's 3 monasteries, and then it's 3 battles, and then I think it just flows a little bit better. I think Three Houses functions much better from a sort of grounding the game perspective. The Somniel feels very fantasy, very fairy tale. It's a big floating rock in the sky with floating rocks around it. And whereas the Monastery, okay, it's obviously not a real world setting, but it feels like it could be, there could be a real world equivalent of a big monastery where there's a group of characters, things like that. It feels like it functions much better as a grounding location between battles. But it's just so slow. And, like, it's the amount of tasks you have to or can repeat as well, and it's often optimal to repeat them. The 2 big ones are cooking, to boost your motivation. If you could only do that once, it would take quite a bit of the tedium out of just doing the same activity over and over and over again. The bigger one is the arena.
Then it also wouldn't matter as much to level up your professor rank.
True. But it would also be the arena. The arena is the really big one for me. Anyone who watched the Interesting Build run, basically towards the end of the game, we just needed money to buy ores to keep weapons in shape. So pretty much every single monastery, which was 2-3 times a month, we were doing like 7 or 8 arena battles. It took forever. Watching Hilda smash people over the head with a killer axe got very boring very quickly, and we did it a lot just to keep funds up. I don't like that kind of stuff being optimal, whereas in the Somniel, sure, there are still a little bit of tedious things, but A, they do feel more skippable, but B, even if you don't skip them, they're not as bad. Like, I would rather do the Wyvern Ride or the push-ups than watch Hilda smack through an arena a few times. The arena like, doing all 3 of your attempts at an arena in the Somniel takes less time than doing 1 arena in Three Houses, which is kind of insane.
Because it's the full tournament every time.
Yeah. And I think the Somniel just flows a lot quicker. That might actually lead me back to a similar thing to you, as maybe I just dislike these hub worlds overall, so the Somniel being quicker might be something I lean to a bit more. I think the one thing that Three Houses might actually have is I was a lot more engaged to go around and talk to all of the characters and like actually get those dialogues, particularly on my earlier playthroughs, whereas even in my first playthrough of Engage, I found myself just not talking to them a lot of the time. That between battle dialogue feels a lot less important. But I would personally lean on the side of the Somniel being better, but I think the Monastery has its merits too. I think it's a lot more grounded as a hub world, and I don't want to say it has a better story presence, but it feels a lot more of just like an actual location rather than a big floating rock in the sky.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's why I kind of fall on disagree, just slightly disagree a little bit with this take, because I think if you're going for, we're going to have a hub world, we're going to have a central location, you should go, if you're going to have it, go all in on it. And Three Houses went all in on it. I would prefer if you don't have it at all, I would, like, my favorite hub world is the Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn menu, base menu, because they even theme it in the background. Like when you're on a boat, it's a little boat background, like the cabin of a ship. When you're in like the winter camp in Day Inn, it's like there's snow in the background. You know, they theme it, they do it all. It gives you all those little subtle nods of, hey, you're here, you're in this location, while still allowing you to very quickly, okay, I'm going to go to bonus experience. Okay, no, I actually want to change skills. Okay, I want to go to the armory, see what's available. I want to go to the smithy. And it's all right there. Meanwhile, the Somniel kind of is just, like I said, it's a half-baked version of my castle.
It's a weird middle ground of the two, I guess, between the sort of the base menu and the monastery.
It tried to be a little bit more interactive than Fate's My Castle, and a little bit less mandatory than Three Houses Monastery, and I think kind of ends up failing at both.
One big point I do actually want to give to the Somniel's favour, and look, I still don't know why they're a thing, I don't know who enjoys this gameplay, but at least the pick-upable items are marked on the map now. That's nice. I don't have to run around looking for them.
Yeah.
I still don't understand who these people are who enjoy running around picking up items that are sat on the floor, but to those people, I hope you're enjoying it. But yeah.
When items are meaningful, like, I find myself, when I very first start a new playthrough, I will always go through the Somniel, probably up and through chapters like 5 or 6, just because I'm trying to get fragments as much as I can, and every little bit matters. After that point, after a certain point, I just stop doing anything outside of, I'm going to visit my dogs, I'm going to do the arena, I'm going to do cooking, I'm going to maybe do some ring stuff, and I'm going to stop by the smithy, because you can do armory from the menu, you can do item shop from the menu, but you can't smith from the menu.
That is actually a fairly huge design flaw, but I think it just falls out of Somniel remit and more onto Engage's menus are relatively poor. Also, the Somniel has Sommi.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a big point in its favour. It has Sommi. Sommi's great.
Yeah. Engage is like a solid 9 or 9.5 game with menus that actually bring it down half a point, I think.
They're fairly poor.
But if I'm going to blame the menus on the Somniel, that's different. I still kind of disagree with the take, because like I said, if you're going to go with the hub world grounding center, do it all the way. If you're going to do something, freaking do it.
That's absolutely fair.
Don't do it halfway and say, oh, we're just trying to appeal to all crowds, because you're appealing to none of them.
I actually can see that. That's definitely fair. I'm still going to lean on the side of agree, but I can definitely see where you're coming from.
Fair enough.
So that was our last take. So some interesting discussion had there. A few where we agreed and a few where we definitely disagreed. But yeah, some good discussion all around. I'd like to thank everyone who submitted takes, whether that be through Reddit or through my community. And I'd like to thank you for appearing on and talking through these points with me.
Yeah, of course. Always glad to be here. If you want to hear some more of my own personal hot takes, link to my channel's in the description. youtube.com/MythrilZenith. Go check it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, it will be down there. I will remember. Absolutely will remember. I will make a note. I am
Don't worry, I'll comment if you forget.
Thank you. I will forget to put my own links in the description. Don't try me. But yeah, that about wraps this up. So thank you very much. So that wraps up the first episode of Agree to Disagree. I'd like to thank MythrilZenith again, both for coming on the show and for making this initial recording such a breeze. I'd also like to thank the people who back the channel on Patreon again. The support is greatly appreciated. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you have any thoughts on this series, please feel free to drop it in the comments. If you want to discuss this video, the channel, or Fire Emblem in general, consider joining the Discord, a link to which is in the description. I'll catch you all next time, have a wonderful day.